Greetings. Welcome to week 8, Justice 261, Ethics in Criminal Justice. I wish you could feel my frustrations. Maybe you are. It's kind of late in the week to get the lecture going. It's because there's been plenty of technical difficulties. There's been a lot of crashing this week. But I do want to get something out to you because I've added something. So I'm going to kind of forego my talk this week on utilitarianism and Kant versus Mills and how do we solve the problem of our young shoplifter, which is our ethical dilemma this week in our discussion board. I've put together some pretty good lectures, some pretty good talks, I think, on these subjects in the last little while, but we keep crashing, and I do want to talk about Wenatchee. So you'll do good on the text. We're doing good on Kant versus Mill. I have great faith in you. I want to talk briefly, though, while I can, about the addition I put on the announcement this week. We've been on our discussion board. It's been getting a little slower and slower, and I've noticed a little less enthusiasm. So I want to throw something else in it. I'm going to try throwing some real world into it, some true crime real world to add to the straight academics of the text, even though every week as we read this text, I like it that much more. Let's see if I can jazz it up a little bit maybe. Originally, when I wrote this class, I was going to have a final exam and a final project. And it turned out I didn't like the book I was going to use, and it just kind of fell by the wayside. And I decided I liked the textbook we're using enough that I'd just go that route, and I wouldn't do this special project. But I think I'm going to offer it up now. If you look in the announcements this week, I've added some links. I've added some links to a large event that shook my ethical world. I was a police chief down in Washington when just after this happened. Well, just before this happened, actually. I was up here in Alaska when the trials were going on. But I had been down there just prior to it, and I knew everybody involved. This case that we're going to study takes place in Wenatchee, Washington. If you're not familiar with Wenatchee, a horribly normal place, kind of like a big Mayberry. Very, very clean, very, I can't think of another word other than normal. It's on the eastern side of the mountains. It's in eastern Washington. It's right just down from the Cascades. As soon as you come out of the Cascades, you hit Wenatchee. And so it's surrounded by, these beautiful mountains. And then it's on these plains where agriculture is taking place. And they've got, miles and miles of apple orchards and cherry orchards and peach orchards. And the Wenatchee River runs through the middle of it. It's about a Juneau-sized town, a little bit bigger than Juneau, but it's got probably about a Juneau-sized town. Small enough where most everybody, you still know an awful lot of people. It's not quite, you don't know everybody, but you know a lot of people. It's kind of like Juneau. The most amazing thing happened in the early to mid 90s. 43 people in Wenatchee were charged with child rape and child molestation. They were alleged to belong to a church in Wenatchee that specialized in small child sex orgies in this church, on the altar and in the classrooms and all throughout the church. There was all of these adult parishioners handing kids back and forth and around and sharing. And eventually 43 of them were charged. 21 of them were sent to prison. Any of us that are in this business, I believe our belief is innocent people don't get arrested and innocent people don't get charged. Those of us that do this for a living know it's, at least, it's very, very hard to arrest and convict a bad guy. It's so hard to do it with a bad guy. you just have this gut feeling, just intuitively, you can pretty much assume that it'd be impossible to do it with an innocent person, with a good guy. It just can't be done. Um, if you have a crime, first you have to have the crime. You have to have a crime. You have to have a victim. Victim has to be willing to come in and give you a statement, and you have to go find evidence, and you have to ID the bad guy, and you have to find the bad guy, and you got to bring the bad guy in, and you got to get him to confess, or you got to find more evidence, and you got to build a case, and you got to take all that to the prosecutor, and you got to convince the prosecutor that the case is legit and worth taking. Um, and the prosecutor has to take it to a grand jury, convince the grand jury that something really happened and you got the right bad guy. And then you've got to go to a jury trial, and he has to convince the jury over the objections of his defense attorney, that you have the right bad guy, and the jury has to find them guilty, and the judge has to agree. That's a lot of hoops. It's a lot of hoops. And it's very, very hard to get from one end to the other with a real, live, legit, guilty bad guy. I just can't imagine doing it with an innocent person. I know it happens. I'm not of the bent that it does not. And especially, I suspect, large urban areas with large minority populations. We know that eyewitness testimony sucks. We know, eyewitness evidence is terrible anymore. We know there's some biases involved. We know it happens. I don't think it happens often. But the idea that it could happen to, almost 4 dozen people in a pretty normal town that we could have all grown up in, I think is really interesting. I think it's just amazing. And like I said, I knew these people. I knew the police chief of this department. I knew Wenatchee's police chief. I knew the sheriff of the county. I had met the prosecutor, the county prosecutor. I didn't know the judge. Um, but all of these people, I mean, I'd been to meetings with them and conferences with them and committees with them, and all of these people seem pretty darn reasonable and pretty darn normal, and how this could happen on their watch. So anyway, I gave you some links. This was a very well reported and investigated situation. I gave you some links to it. What I'd like to do, I want you to read this material. Maybe we can just throw it in with the discussions. Maybe we can throw in some, gee whiz, this week we're reading this chapter, and I think that if Kant had been in Wenatchee, then he would have wanted this to happen, or he would have thought that this should happen. Or when you're writing your papers, if you want to write about what you're reading about Wenatchee, that's good. Or if you'd really like to do me a final project, make me a PowerPoint, make me a report. We can do some extra credit. It can you can turn it in finals week, you can turn it in any week you want, but I think we can make a 100-point extra credit project out of the Wenatchee sex ring case, if you'd like to go that far. I think it's an amazing case. I think the ethics in it are just amazing. I don't think you could find any place that had such an ethical breakdown, and I think it'd be a great study for the rest of this week. So before I crash and turn off again, I'm going to quit there. Go read the links. Let's start filtering this information into our discussions and our papers. And if you'd like to do a large extra credit project, I think I can make it worth your time and effort, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. So thank you. See you inside.